My name is Earl Willis Jr. I'm from the Warren County Public Library. Today is April the 25th and we're in Bowling Green, Kentucky. And today I'm interviewing Mr. Ray Biggerstaff. Mr. Biggerstaff, where and when were you born?
It's Dr. Biggerstaff.
Doctor, okay.
In case you want.
Okay, Dr. Biggerstaff.
I was born in Whitesburg, Kentucky in 1942.
Okay, 1942. Did you have any other siblings or parents that were in the military?
My father was in the military. That's Ray Biggerstaff Sr. He fought in the Battle of the Bulge. He spent a considerable number of years in the service and was wounded several times. So, and he was former state VFW commander and All-American commander for Kentucky.
Okay. So would it be safe to say that had a pretty strong
background commitment for him?
Yeah.
Yes, I served as his loyalty chairman when he was state VFW commander in the state.
So
We've both been involved a lot with veterans throughout the years.
Yeah. So you probably had a lot of like patriotic spirit going into.
Absolutely.
Yeah. What were you doing before you entered the service?
I just completed my master's degree at University of Michigan School of Public Health, and was assigned to the district health department at Somerset, and got my notice to enter the draft.
Okay. What branch did you serve?
In the U.S. Army.
Okay.
For 4 years.
Were you enlisted or were you drafted?
I was enlisted for, I was drafted and enlisted for a year, and then got a direct commission in the medical field service corps.
Okay. Was there a specific reason why you picked the Army over other branches when you enlisted, or?
No particular reason. It was my time to enter the draft.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that's how that came about.
Do you recall being sworn in? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
I remember that at Fort Knox.
Fort Knox.
Yeah, we sworn in at Fort Knox, and following the basic training at Fort Knox, I went to Fort Sam Houston and went through the combat medic training course there, and then later had my MOS changed to preventative medicine specialist and was assigned to Walter Reed.
Okay.
And that was probably the beginning of my best education. It came from the service.
Okay.
And,
okay. Though for the people who are just watching this and they're not familiar, MOS is what, military occupational specialty.
Yes, that's right.
Okay. So that was your specialty, your job, correct?
And as a preventive medicine specialist at Walter Reed, we taught parasitology to doctors and physicians that were going to be assigned in various areas throughout the world.
Okay. Do you remember what your mother and father thought when you enlisted? Were they?
They accepted the fact and was very excited about it, and it was just a normal process that I was here to serve.
Okay. Your dad was probably pretty proud of you.
Yes, I think so.
Yes. Do you remember? I always like to ask people. Do you remember, like leaving on the bus or flying an airplane to your basic training? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I remember getting on the bus at Ashland, Kentucky, and taking that bus all the way to Fort Knox and going through basic training. I remember all that really well.
Do you? Was that the first time you'd been away from home, or do you usually when I ask people, usually when they go to basic training somewhere, that's usually if they've grown up in a small town, that's usually like the first time that they've went somewhere, left home. Is that kind of your experience, or?
Well, I attended Caney Creek Community Center, which is now known as June Buchanan High School. This was kind of a prep school for a college at Alice Lloyd College. That's currently there. And I stayed there for maybe 2 or 3 weeks at a time, and then go home on weekends. So I was familiar about being away from home.
Okay.
But no, this was an entirely new experience.
Yeah.
You can't compare that to,
Yeah.
it's all new friends and new people to get to know.
Do you know where do you say you did your basic training at?
Fort Knox.
Fort Knox. Okay, so that's in the eastern Kentucky part, right?
That's right.
They used to do a lot of their tank training there, correct?
Pardon?
The tank training, they used to do a
Yes,
lot of
they
tank
do. Yes, they do.
Okay.
We had, I went through eight weeks of basic training there before we were assigned to our advanced training, and that's when I went to Fort Sam Houston.
Okay. Do you remember when you first started your basic training? Does anything stand out, or?
I think just the basic physical training itself, you found you had pain that you didn't know that existed at the time. We qualified on the rifle range. One day was a blizzard. It was snowing. White silhouettes were popping up. The next day it was a rain, torrential downpour. So I remember those kinds of activities.
Did any of your instructors, your drill sergeant, did you stick out in your mind? Do you remember them pretty well?
Yes, Sergeant Swires was their platoon commander.
Do you think
Sergeant Brooks was assistant.
Do you see anything stick out in your mind about them, and do you remember them? Or?
Yes, I do. Different activities that occurred, which the personalities were quite unique.
Yeah. Did you like the military life? Did you adjust pretty well?
I adjusted and accepted it, and I tried to do the best I could do on a daily basis. And I think at Fort Knox, during my 8 weeks of training, I had 3 weekend passes, and that's unheard of sometimes. So there were several of us that worked very hard. If you're going to police up the area, picking up trash, just be the best you can be at that time.
Yeah.
Do your job, do it well, and that's the way you survive.
Yeah. Do you remember writing back home to your parents? Do you remember that?
Yes, I do. I remember doing that, and I was fortunate to be able to, at Fort Knox, I had some of my family that lived in the metropolitan Louisville area, so I was able to, that was the weekend passes a couple of times. I was lucky to get to visit them. So
what months were you in basic training at Fort Knox?
This was in November and December, heading into that
so you said there was some snow?
Oh yes, snow and rain and cold. It was very.
What was that like? Did you spend a lot of time outside, and when it was?
We spent a lot of time outside. We would march out to the rifle range, and very, very cold weather. We didn't. Today's Army is quite different. Back then, when we were scheduled to go out for maneuvers or setting up a perimeter, whatever it might be, we did that. It was almost like a 10-mile march sometimes at Fort Knox. It was, and that was no excuses, and you accepted that. The running was kind of difficult, getting shin splints and things like that, but that was part of the training.
Yeah. So you said that when you were on the rifle range, you were shooting at white silhouettes when it was snowing. Can you? That's pretty hard to do.
It is very hard to do. And the first time I was trying not to get my fatigues wet or dirty, and then I missed the first couple of shots, and then I just went prone in the snow, and then in the following day when it was the rain just really like 120 degrees, really coming in real hard, and we were right ahead and qualified.
Were you using the M16 or the M14?
16.
16, okay. So more or less you see a white target and you just saw black sight posts, right?
It was interesting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just shoot low and let it bounce.
Yeah. So that would be. Did you think that was fun, or did you think that you didn't?
I just accepted it as part of the training and just embraced it and just went on with it. I knew it would only last so long.
Yeah, because it seemed like you adapted because you were trying to not get your fatigues dirty, and then you said, well, if I want to
heck with it. If I want
to make good shots, I need to just get in there.
I think that's the adjustment part, and also the competition part. You want to be the best in the company if you could. So.
Yeah. So that was. Did you? So when you left basic training, where did you go? Can you tell us about your specialized training that you?
I went to Fort Sam Houston. My particular platoon, I guess the entire battalion, was going to Fort Polk for advanced infantry training. And then those of us that were specialized, in my background was in the medical field, so I was sent to Fort Sam Houston for the combat medic training. And then following that training, I was going to join my group at Fort Polk, and then I guess go on to the Delta region in Vietnam. However, when I was at Fort Sam Houston, I just got through working my way through school. I worked several years. I said, my MOS is not exactly in the position where I'd best serve. And I talked to the commander there, and my MOS was changed to preventive medicine specialist. And I had an option going to Walter Reed or to CDC, so I selected Walter Reed. And had the greatest experience because I was taught how to basically take the Armed Forces Institute of Pathology lab manual, which is used universally internationally for training to train physicians and lab specialists who would, for example, from Vietnam, you had Giardia, histolytica, and malaria. So we basically taught the physicians how to use the microscopes and how to do advanced staining and things like this. And it was a repetitive thing, so therefore spaced repetition just kept coming and coming, and I had a tremendous education there. So I really enjoyed that. And then following that, I got my direct commission as a captain at Walter Reed, and then went to Fort Sam Houston for officers training. Okay. And then I was assigned to coordinate the correspondence course branch for the military at Fort Sam Houston.
For the people that are watching this and not familiar with Walter Reed, can you tell them maybe about Walter Reed, where it's at, and kind of about Walter Reed?
Walter Reed is a traditional hospital in Washington, D.C., and they receive their special. So it's kind of a special unit dealing with a unique type of casualties. And what we did in our lab was to examine individuals that had chronic or acute type dysentery problems. You had to identify the organisms that was causing the problems, and then as a result, additional research on how to combat those organisms. And I think that defying and cheating death is it's a reward experience in that case.
So in Vietnam, in the jungle, wet surrounding like that, malaria would be pretty common. Would that be correct? Or
yes, it was. Now, I was executive officer of the Medevac at Camp Evans. So what I did as soon as I arrived there, I was well aware of the area, and I was known as the Pentaprime Kid. I basically made sure that any existing water in the area or standing water was oiled. We just slimed it to kill anything that existed, and eliminated. We had oil going through all the drains and stuff in the area, so just killed everything. That's one way to stop the problem from malaria. We did continue every day taking our chloroquine and Primacan pills on a daily basis.
Can you maybe tell the people what malaria consists of, how it affects the body, and how it's detrimental to?
Well, now at the medical unit, we had 4 physicians there.
Okay.
A thoracic surgeon who was the captain, he was the CO, and I was the XO captain. And we had several physicians that could, basically I don't think they were that familiar with malaria as you go through, medical schools here, unless you go to Tulane or other areas where you really study malaria. But yes, I think the people that came in for treatment, you just basically dealt with the symptoms and made sure that they had the appropriate drugs to combat the problem.
Okay.
But you eliminate their breeding places, and that was the key thing.
So how would malaria affect a soldier in Vietnam? Can you explain that?
Fever, chills, uncomfortable, just very debilitating type effect it'll have on the.
So can it be fatal?
Oh yes, it could be fatal if going untreated.
Yeah.
But our troops were very seldom did I see many situations where there was a problem with malaria. They were well prevented, good preventive measures,
Okay.
and they knew when they went out in the field, how to take care of themselves. And same way in our troop area as well. Of course, we eliminated the breeding places where I was at, but outside, when the sweep platoons and things like this in the field, they took their preventive measures very well.
Okay. So can you explain, other than Walter Reed, can you tell us where else you served?
At Walter Reed, I was there for 1 year, and then I received my direct commission. I went to Fort Sam Houston and completed the environmental training program there, environmental health. This was a new MOS that they were trying to adapt it to people's background and experience. And as I was going through training there, I've become familiar with the non-resident instruction training program, where basically would give advanced training to, it's like a correspondence course type program for anyone that's progressing through the military, whether it be private to general, was taking various courses. And I coordinated that program until I was assigned to go to Vietnam. And I spent my last year of service in Vietnam.
Okay. Can you tell us maybe about some of your service in Vietnam and how you worked with the troops?
Well, having a 1-year experience as enlisted helped, I think, adjusted to the officer's responsibilities. And we kind of ran the company. General Barry said after we'd been there for some time, said that our medical company in Vietnam reminded him of an infantry company back in the United States. And all we did, I was at the base camp at Camp Evans, and we were away from our company A, B, and support companies, and all of those were located down at Phu Bai, which is many miles away. So we were kind of the rogue company, all by itself. So we learned to survive and take care of ourselves pretty much, and we did a real fine job. I don't ever remember anyone that came into our A&D, which is missions and service training, or to deal with wounded. I don't remember anyone ever coming in and not leaving alive.
Okay.
We never lost a patient. And
that's good.
we had some crack guys that were really good, good medics, good physicians, and we changed orders a couple of times to make sure that we had 2 thoracic surgeons instead of 1. So we had about 90% of the casualties for our entire battalion. All the action was in our area, all the way from Hamburger Hill up to Ripcord, which are kind of famous stories. And we included Sword and Far Base Gloria too, so there's kind of an interesting area up that way.
Yeah. Can you tell people what a thoracic surgeon does?
Thoracic surgeon is primarily responsible for just open heart surgery.
Okay.
Like, usually when we would go out to pick up wounded, we had a good triage system in place. If someone had a sucking chest wound or a head wound, we would, if it was in a particular area where the sanctuary, which was the hospital ship, we knew what we were dealing with, so we picked those people up and would transport them directly to the hospital ship. Otherwise, when other assortments of wounds, which was close to our admissions area at the company, medical company, we would bring those in for triage, and the thoracic surgeon there was the CO, and he basically would assign the other physicians to whatever wounds that would be existing at the time. But he was involved a lot with the heart, chest type wounds.
Thoracic cavity?
Thoracic cavity
Okay.
area. And we had some really good people at, and good medics that were advanced training, which is quite a, I guess, equivalent to our advanced EMTs today.
Okay.
So we had some people that was really good, and we kept our people together, and once you get good people, you work twice as hard to keep them there. So we were defying and cheating death in an aggressive manner, and made sure that we did, when the troops came in, they got immediate priority.
That's good. Do you, maybe this is something that you maybe you can talk about, or just tell me you don't want to talk about it. How do you, when you work in a combat situation, how do you, if you're working in the medical field, how does it, every day that you see people that are wounded, or did you just not see that, you just see them as, well, today I'm going to save somebody's life? Or how do you deal with that?
I handled most of the triage. Sometimes when we had several choppers that were coming in, I just assumed the responsibility of triage, just to see, establishing priority of treatment. And I just looked at it as a kind of a business of taking care of people. Defying and cheating death is the way I look at it. Doing the best you possibly can, and getting kind of oblivious to the emotion. I did not get wrapped up in each individual situation. I just knew that, let's get on with it. We'll deal with it later. Let's take care of the wounded at that particular time. And I guess I didn't let it get to me. I couldn't let it get to me, really.
Because if you got personal and get your heartstrings, that would make a long day, wouldn't it?
I was really concerned about it, but I focused all of that energy on saving the person and getting them out of there to Camp Jama, Japan, or the hospital, wherever it might be at that particular time, or to the evacuation hospital.
Okay.
So it was always aggressive type moves. I didn't really sit back and belabor the situation. It was just take care of the wounded and keep things moving.
So you're pretty very professional the way you.
I'd say so. Yes,
Yeah.
I think that was the best approach to it, and not. Oh yes, we've seen every individual type of wound that you could possibly think about, and I think those situations, from burns to various types of chest wounds, head wounds, things like that, but you dealt with it at the time, and everyone just sucked it in and did their job, and to move them on for additional care and treatment.
Yeah, I think that's the good professional attitude to have.
It was just one way to survive. It's tough. It's dealing with madness, and you just basically embrace it and go on.
Yeah, I like what you said about cheating death.
That was the attitude, and we never lost a patient. That's why we aggressively we would triage on the way in. For example, we might need to take that person. Don't bring them to the aid station here, but take them direct to the evacuation hospital. So our guys were, trained to do that assessment in midair whenever you were dealing with patients. So we had a good routine to get them stabilized as soon as you possibly could, and that was the best part.
What did you do in your off time? If you had any off time, your
We had some off time to, well, I guess you could sit on their porch where a hooch was, their building area, and you could look out almost 10 miles to a mountain range, and beyond that mountain range was the Ashall Valley. So we were about 10 miles from the Ashall Valley, and separating us was several fire bases to protect the base camp. And on an off day, sometimes we would go down to Fubai, to maybe the PX, or a couple of times maybe down to China Beach, like a weekend type trip. See, we were busy constantly, and the thing about it is, everywhere in the world, it seems like when our troops, when it became mealtime, they would all sit down and get together in a little group and start chowing down and talking, and that's the time for a mortar or rocket to come in. So our Medevac crews, which were outstanding, were always in the air during mealtime, in the evenings. Very seldom did they sit down and have an honest meal. So we were constantly bombarded with, especially in the evenings, around mealtime, that's when they knew when to hit. The whole world knows you have to sit down and chat. And I'd usually call 2 choppers on the way up, and our 2 choppers would be going out to pick up wounded. It was not a daily type thing, but practically all of our casualty type situations occurred, plus or minus an hour with their normal 5 o'clock in the evening, something like this, plus or minus. And so there was a constant backup. We had constant backup. So when we did kind of relax, or sometimes it's just good just to relax on the porch there and maybe have a beer and just sit there and
kind of clear your mind.
Just sit back and maybe play cards. We had a good group of guys that had phonographs and music and recorders and things like that, so that kept things busy. But it gave us a little time just to improve on where we were there. We got a lot of support from the general staff, because they were impressed with all the things that we were doing, and they gave us paint, they did everything. So we fixed up the company area to make it, and to make it home. That was kind of the objective, to just improve the area, get everybody involved. And I changed the rules a little bit, letting each person decorate their own building and hooches the way they wanted to, not the militaristic style, but make it your home. And just had a real loyalty group. And what we did within the battalion, if you had a disciplinary problem in A company, they would transfer them to B company. Nobody was transferred out of my company, Company C. We dealt with our own problems. We washed our own laundry, if I hate to use that term, but anyone that we had, we dealt with them within our own company. They adjusted. Those that had drug problems, whatever it might be, we dealt with them in our own company. We didn't transfer them on to other people. And we had people waiting to try to come to our place, because it was, we just took care of our people. It was an obsession to take care of our troops really good. And if we take care of them, then they'll take care of the wounded. And that was, very independent, arrogant way of dealing with things, but we handled our own system up there. And we got very good support from the general staff on supplies and general things that we needed.
I don't know if you ever watched the show MASH. Is it kind of like that?
Well, in Korea, the MASH units were, the forward hospitals. Now, what we did in Vietnam, where I was at Camp Evans, we would have a Connex, which is quite similar to a density dumpster, and you would load that up with medical supplies. And when a particular division was going to move into an area, let's say Quezon or beyond the fire bases into maybe the Ashall Valley, then there was always plans to have a Chinook, I guess, load up the Connex and move us out on a hilltop somewhere closer to the battle.
Okay.
Fortunately, we didn't have to do that. We were prepared to do that many times, and it never occurred because of the changes in the orders. But as far as comparing it to MASH, yes, we didn't have any women there. It was all men at the base camp. The women were at the evacuation hospital. That's where the men and women were at the evacuation hospital. Only men were where we were at. And I guess we were about as forward as you could get because, as I said, we were 10 miles from the Ashaw Valley, and we had sweep platoons all the area, but they were encountering various types of hostiles all the time. So we were about as close to the front, air front, as we could get.
Okay.
We supplied evacuation to the fire bases. So a fire base, for example, would have maybe, if it was the first of 506, for example, they would have maybe 3 platoons that were sweep platoons that were patrolling the area around the fire base. So, and that's what we were medevacing and to take care of those troops. So basically, we were at the front, but we were a little more layered as far as protection there.
So, I know what I was going to say.
Well, we had a lot of the annex that
Okay.
that the MASH unit did.
Okay.
I suppose if I had to, we did have our majors that were kind of unique and special, and I guess I was more of a BJ type. I wasn't the Hawkeye because I had more responsibilities as XO, but we kept ourselves entertained quite often.
Would you think of yourself as just would you think of yourself more like a coworkers, or did you think of yourself like as brothers?
Brothers, I felt that was the feeling there. Even though it was a medical company, as far as officers and enlisted, we were just brothers working together. I don't think there was any problems with rank or anything like that. No, very few disciplinary problems. We had an understanding that if the wounded arrived and you were incapacitated, and you maybe were on drugs or you were freaking out, and you went down to the helipad a little bit inebriated, that was the wrong thing to do.
It cost somebody's life, couldn't you?
And it might cost them theirs. That was just kind of an understanding. We had, I didn't object to, we had people in the company that used alcohol, had troops that did smoke marijuana, and but this was on their on time or downtime, and as far as any strong disciplinary actions, there were none. As I said, we had several people that were alcoholics that had their DTs, and we dealt with all those problems in-house. Vietnam did not cause a drug culture. We drafted the drug. We drafted the drug guys that were addicted to drugs. In other words, Vietnam didn't cause everybody as soon as you arrived in country to start taking drugs. We drafted the druggies already.
Yeah,
so I think that was a problem.
I've talked to the people in the interviews, and they more or less said sometimes, a lot of times you might get people that had a choice between going to jail or the army, and sometimes you get maybe
I'm sure that
rough, maybe rougher characters, maybe.
Well, in our company though, it was very clear understanding, and the guys policed themselves in a way. And we had 2 guys that were experimenting with amphetamines. And they came down, and when the first of 506 they had infantry, the wounded was coming in on a chopper. They come down kind of freaked out and laughing and carrying on. I immediately transferred those two to that infantry company. So they went from the Medevac company that afternoon in a Jeep. We took them across the base camp to the 1st 506 headquarters. They were assigned there, and then they took the amnesty program, which was not it's just an easy way of protecting yourself, to say, I use drugs, and then they can put their own spin on it, and I guess eventually ended up in a real soft job somewhere else. But no one in our company crossed that line. So we dealt with it immediately.
So you were, I don't know if I remember asking, you were a captain? Were you a
Yes,
captain?
captain.
So you were an officer, and you had some authority where you can...
I was the executive officer of the company, really responsible for the entire company. The CEO was a thoracic surgeon, so his job was all medical.
Okay.
He didn't get involved with anything else in the company. It's me and the first sergeant. Of course, I let sergeants do sergeant's work. I'm not a micromanager. I respected the people. That's why we got along so good. And we had a really good, a good bunch of troops. We did a lot of service to the rest of the. We had about 5 or 6 companies that ate with us, so they would hang out. Even the CIA sometimes would come over and hang out with the our medical unit, because nobody else cared about them, or they didn't have any friends elsewhere. So our company was kind of a place for them just to come over and hang out with us from time to time.
As far as I know, I've talked to other people. As far as the mortar attacks, do you feel as though they were kind of like a harassing thing, or do you think they were, as in other words, I'm here, don't forget about me, or do you think they were actually trying to, how am I trying to?
Harassment?
Yeah. Was it more of like they wanted to inflict casualties, or they wanted to harass you in psychological thing?
I would say probably harassment. It depends on your relationship with the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong. Different animals here. And the Viet Cong, it almost goes back to, trying to think of a good analogy, the Chinese and the Bolsheviks way back. They had a certain, in Vietnam you had your Viet Cong, where the North Vietnamese could use them to for all their bidding against the
I'm
South
glad
Vietnamese.
you brought that up. So from my understanding, there was the North Vietnamese army, and you had your Viet Cong. The North Vietnamese army were your like kind of like your rank and file. They were more trained. Your Viet Cong were more like your guerrilla fighters from your villages and just kind of hit and run. And
yes, they were, and they very seldom did the North Vietnamese supply the South, or supply the Viet Cong, because in most cases the Viet Cong had to fend for themselves, rob, steal, whatever the proper, and was constantly harassing the troops. For example, with our sweep platoons that were around the fire base, the base camp, of course, if you see a flash, that's probably you call it in for an airstrike or a artillery. So usually a lot of the Viet Cong might carry a mortar or a rocket for 3 or 4 weeks or so, and then finally we had, for example, about 6 might be fired toward the base camp as harassment, or they hope they hit something, but when you fire it in, usually about 6, you might have 2 that might misfire, maybe 1 might blow up in the air, and 1 might be a dud, and then possibly 2 that might. So the percentage was quite low.
well, this is old Soviet stuff, right? Old Soviet equipment.
A lot of them was, Czechoslovakia, all of and a lot of Soviets. Of course, the AK-47.
It was a Soviet.
And if you had a choice of using the AK-47, I didn't have a lot, but could drag an AK-47 through the mud and water and come up firing M16, 14s.
Tire tolerance.
They clog up and dangerous. They had the best equipment because there's not much to it.
Yeah, and to the people that are not familiar with it, the difference between the AK-47 and M16 is the AK-47 fires a bigger round than the M16. And the AK-47 has looser tolerances, and it's not as accurate as the M16 is more accurate, but it has higher tolerances. And so AK-47 would thrive in the jungle and the wet.
Oh yes.
And I've heard of people they just get their bootstrings and they put little oil on it and they drag it through there and they're good to go.
That we brought in several wounded Viet Cong that were wounded, and they're at AK-47 with Cobra gunships go in with the mini guns. They had holes in the barrels. You still could fire the rifle. So it was still, beat up, but I don't think it's just like a toy, like you can.
Yeah.
It's there. You don't have to go through all the other things that you have to do with M16 to 14. Clean the barrel and all this kind of stuff. And it jams. I think. And the use of 45s, officers carried 45s. 45s would scare somebody or make a noise. I always carried that when I went out with the Medevac group. I had a M16 with bandoliers. I was ready to be shot down. I expected to get shot down every time that we went out for and our guys were prepared for that. That's why we had Cobra gunships, but in many cases, our guys went out. This is where the Medevac units deserve so much praise, is that the Medevac units went out when everything was socked in. You actually can cut fog with a knife. You really can. You can. It was so thick, and our guys would go out with a light and trying to shine down and have to blow a hole in the canopy to hoist down the hoist to bring wounded up. And our guys went out in all kinds of weather when the gunships, everything was grounded. But we had attack urgent, or we had a true urgency, and we had to go out. And our guys went out throughout the night, just flying into pitch dark, and then you hear the pat 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 going all around you, trying to But everybody sees the chopper, and you're coming out real, trying to. We took all the calls, and. These guys, we never even had an awards officer for the battalion until about halfway through my tour over there. And I lost 2 ships in midair, just blown up two units when we went out to the ripcord situation. And so, somebody's got to start documenting this. They took us for granted, Medevac unit, you go out, take care of it, that's it. And it's like the ER. You go to the hospital, you expect to be treated and get gone, that's it. And but I think the Medevac units were underestimated. But they knew when Charlie Med was on the way out, that kept them going in the field. They knew that once we said hello, once we brought them on the chopper, even though we had a few of ours shot down on the way back, but we went out immediately and picked them up and kept going. But they knew when we came out that their odds were very good to survive, and that was the spirit that existed that I was talking about before, about defying and cheating death, because we just dared anyone to die on us, and that was just an aggressive, arrogant way of thinking, and we didn't expect anything different.
Yeah, I mean, but to the people that don't understand, maybe you can explain. The sound of a AK-47 is different than M16, right? You got the distinct sound.
Yeah, well,
sort of.
Like a bat, 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 bat.
Yeah.
Just a different, just a little bit different.
Yeah.
Trying to do a Gomer Pyle
Yeah.
impersonation, that was like bam, 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 or something with Barney, but it was just more of a, you can hear just a unique sound, especially most of the time when we were, I didn't go out on every mission, but sometimes there were real bad situations. I did go out sometimes with the troops because I just had just couldn't believe the conditions and the fog banks and stuff. You know, you just say this is just, you know, this is not right, but you have wounded, and we just headed into the dark. The guys did. I give them all credit, not me. But our guys went out. Sometimes, like when the fire base ripcord was overrun by the North Vietnamese regulars that time, and we had the sweep platoons were all trying to come in to be extracted, and that's when I lost 2 ships mid-air. We were going out to Medevac and said, you know, we'll do the our guys would be lined up. I had 7 choppers lined up to take wounded to the evacuation hospital, but we used the aviation battalions to go in and do the pickups, and you switched during that time, and kept right on going. We had the memorial services a couple of days later, but we didn't stop. We just had to keep going. Just switch the fact no more ships are going to get blown up, not my guys. So, you know, we let the insertion guys, you know, we're trained to do that. And this was, but during that time, we had a lot of changeover on you know, whether or not you should be there and why are we there and things like that. You don't stop to do that. You're, you know, you're obligated to serve, and you serve your commanding officer the best way you possibly can, and do your job. You don't sit down and try to get involved with politics and stuff.
I've asked the other Vietnam veterans, and this is something you talk about, you're not talking about. Did you ever watch the news? And if so, how did that affect you? Back, I mean, the protesting and all the other stuff. Never watched the news. We went to base camp. We didn't have, didn't have a TV. Very little Armed Forces radio. But a lot of our guys had the most expensive stereo systems in the world that you get through the PASEX catalog and stuff. So they had entertainment there, but not. Never watched TV or the news. Wasn't picking up on the local protesting and things that happened in the United States. Even when I came back, I didn't see all the things that people were talking about. People coming up and calling you baby killers and things like this. I did not experience that. I would have reacted at that time, I'm sure, but nothing came up. I didn't experience that at all. And I am aware of the fact that the news, the so-called fake news that was coming out of Vietnam back here to the States made us look better than we really were. I think you know, what's good for the press and what's good for the people. They kept a lot of the comments that Westmoreland and others were making at the time were not, let's just say they basically put their spin on it, the positive spin, you know, for the war. And I knew a little bit different than that. Okay, so to the people that are not familiar with the Vietnam era, Westmoreland, he was the big, he was kind of like Eisenhower in the World War II, right? He was the big commanding general, and he kind of was. Yeah. But I think certain terminology, for example, you never retreated, you engaged in tactical retrograde movements. Okay, I understand that, and you know, and whenever I really looked after my troops quite often, and even though I was a captain, I got referred to as an 03 2 or 3 times, which means that's where a colonel kind of puts you in your place, you know. Yeah. But we were, as I said before, we embraced our responsibilities and we protected them very much. And but yeah, I was told once, you know, we engaged in tactical retrograde movements. I said, I understand that. Just how you terminate, how you put your spin on it. Then I could see that they were
our reports, and I went to brigade briefings every day, and we might engage the enemy, and the enemy fled in an unknown direction. That was a common report. But then we'd always, the reports seemed to come up that we got 2 or 3 kills during that particular activity. Putting a positive spin on it, I guess that's what everybody needed to know, that we were doing that.
Do you remember when you left Vietnam, and how did you feel?
I guess the most, during halfway through the service, we had an R&R where we got to go to Hawaii. We flew my wife down to Hawaii. But then after a 1 week R&R, then I headed back to Vietnam. I said, oh man, this is not, I'd rather get it over with and not have to go back. So went back in, kind of readjusted, and then we had some changes at battalion, and they moved me down as the S1, which is administrative officer of the battalion. And I was there for maybe a couple of months before I was, but during that time, I really became a little more concerned about survival at that time. Prior to that, I didn't mind riding on the skids and the chopper and getting away with just total ignorance. But during the last week or so, you get a little concerned that maybe I might be able to make it out okay, and then you become concerned. And the choppers that when I was hitching a ride down to Da Nang to try to get out of there, one was a Chinook that had to took fire and had to stop, and we had a Medevac that had to take a TAC urgent and go pick up. So I was in the air. I really had a headache by the time I got down to Da Nang to get out of there. And then I stayed almost 2 days in the hangar so I could take the southern flight. I didn't want to take the northern flight. When we went to Vietnam, we slid off the runway in Alaska and into the revetment. So that was icy times, And then coming back, I wanted to take the southern route. Got all the way to, we finally got to Seattle to check out. When I got there, we had to, I said, well, I'll go, I didn't want to fly across the Rockies. I said, I'll go south, go to Dallas and up that way. So I did that. It was a safe trip going south. And I got into Cincinnati and got on one of these half-engine Piedmonts to fly from Cincinnati to Lexington. And the instruments went out during the rainstorm. And I remember there were 7 of us on board. I said, I don't care. I said, after all I've been through, you calling on me, I'm not coming. Talking to the Lord. I was talking to the Lord. I said, I'm not coming. And we got 7 of them on board, and the pilot said, we would like for y'all to go to the windows, and we think we can come down on Versailles Road and kind of follow the light post in so we could come to the airport, because we needed help, because we had to go underneath the clouds. So I got involved with getting everybody to the windows and everybody looking out. And so when we finally landed, I just said, boy, I'd hate to get killed in Kentucky.
We went to Vietnam,
And then when we landed, everybody was yelling and screaming. My head was just cracking, it's all stressed out.
Yeah.
So everybody's welcomed me home, and I was just worn down.
Yeah, that would be kind of play games in your mind as you went through all these firefights and this danger in Vietnam, and then you get that wreck in
Instruments
Kentucky.
go out on the Piedmont coming from Cincinnati down to, I took all the southern route to avoid any hassles or weather currents, and then all of a sudden I ran into there, and that was, but once I got back, it was, I was only back for a short period of time, and then I came to Western. I wanted to get my wife to finish school, and I took a job at Western, and count my military, I had 30 years of service.
Okay, you said you were a doctor. I didn't realize that.
Yeah, I did my undergraduate degree at UK. Came down from Alice Lloyd College. I was in Eastern Kentucky. I had a place to stay in Lexington, kind of a scholarship.
Okay.
finished UK. Following UK, I worked 3 years. I had to have a working experience in the medical field. 3 years with the Department of Community Medicine at UK. We had the first countywide demonstration project for TB eradication, which is a major national project. Following that, that gave me 3 years working experience, and I qualified to be admitted to the School of Public Health in Michigan. Considered that the best school at the time. And after I completed my work at Michigan, then I came back and took the job at Somerset. Then that led me to getting into the service. After service, I was at Western for about 10 years, I guess. And then I
What did you teach at Western?
Department of Public Health.
Okay.
And taught the EMT course and a lot of the early courses. Then I went to University of Indiana. I had to join a doctoral program there and complete my doctorate degree in higher education.
Yeah, that's really interesting because you're the second Vietnam veteran I've interviewed in this program with the doctor. There's another doctor. He's Gary Villarreal.
Villarreal, yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and he was a professor at Western.
Mhm.
So that's the second doctor. You're two doctors in both Vietnam veterans. That's really neat.
I know Gary real well.
Yeah.
And here I'm a member of the American Legion, VFW, and the Military Officers Association of America,
Okay.
local chapter.
And can you this is the time where anybody wants to you can say you have the floor, and if anybody wants to watch this interview, what would you have them to know about your military service and anything you had in your mind? What would you? And also, I'd like to talk about maybe you can maybe talk about maybe the way you're having the veterans and the
Veterans nursing home.
yes, sir.
After Vietnam, when my dad was a state VFW commander, I served as his loyalty chairman, and that got me involved with that. And of course, the different articles that we had to publish in the journal every month related to his patriotism, going out of style, calling their attention to become a warrior in your surroundings here. Let's don't forget how you got here.
Yeah.
And I've always been a member of the BFW for all the years, and then I joined the American Legion, and then through the Military Officers Association, we have what we call a community blueprint project, which is identifying different areas that you can help veterans in the area. It's education, financial, it might be housing. So I selected the housing area to concentrate on that because I've heard so many people talking about, we need a nursing home here, we want one here, and they didn't know how to go about getting it done. I've worked with the Brad office many times. I was on the EMS task force many years ago to get that first started here. So I knew that we had to have something similar. Our proposal had to be something similar to a certificate of need or a grant proposal. So you had to identify your need. So we identified what is now 40,000 veterans in South Central Kentucky, representing 24 counties, that a nursing home here in Bowling Green, a 90-bed nursing home, would serve that particular target group. And you had to fill out the appropriate paperwork here, get letters of support from all the veterans organizations, put it together. We're asking for $30 million, 19.5 coming from the federal government, 10.5 coming from the state. So you better know what you're doing. So it's no brag, just fact. So we worked with the Chamber of Commerce and the Transport Board to set aside 20 acres for us for the building site, which is $1.5 million almost, which was good. Then we worked with the Brad office to come up with a proposal, and then I worked with the Commissioner for Veteran Affairs in Frankfurt. They basically make the ultimate decision. And we completed a needs assessment that went to the federal government. That's how we got on the list for the $19.5 million, because but they had a needs assessment. You had to identify your need, but also justify it. If I said, well, and we had charts, maps, overlays, and everything to support this. For example, over in Tompkinsville, you might say, in Tompkinsville, we had a chart showing the distance of the veterans in Tompkinsville to all the different nursing homes in the state. And then they could come to Bowling Green quicker than they could go to the other 4 facilities. So you have to, now that's identifying the need, then you have to justify it, and then they say, well, what about the veterans in Tompkinsville? You know, if they have Medicare, they can stay in a nursing home there and not come to Bowling Green. Well, that's true, but the only facility in Tompkinsville at the time is 98% occupied. So statistically, you have to show that you have to justify this.
Yeah.
And we put together the most comprehensive feasibility study I think I've ever seen anywhere in the world. And then we had Senator Wilson and Representative Meredith did our leads in the House and Senate.
Senator Wilson, he's a veteran also, isn't he?
Yes, he is. He's a
Marine Corps?
Marine Corps veteran.
Yeah.
That's right. And so he worked the Senate, and Meredith did the House, and we prepared the bills. Back in January, Representative Meredith introduced the bill on the floor, but that was kind of a dry run, and the Senate and the House started using us as a pawn, back and forth, playing little silly games, and it ended up that it was didn't even get to the governor. But this time we used the process of going through both houses. That worked great. We got unanimous support, but you have to have a document. If you don't have the document, then senators, representatives, they can't sell it. You got to have a document that's not broad nebulous generalities, but meaningful specifics. You better get right to the point. So we had all this information, and the governor had copies of it. He had good support, but we met with the governor at least 3 times. Commissioner for Veteran Affairs, I worked with him for a year to develop the needs assessment that went to the federal government. So we had it all together, just textbook type approach to get it done. The governor has approved the funding for the state, and what they're doing at this moment is preparing a letter to go along with the environmental impact study that the Chamber of Commerce had finished for the Transpark, and that will go to DC. Once they get it all together, they'll just go down the check criteria list, and then place us on a national active funding list. And the funding list is based on priorities, different categories. And for example, they might have category 1 is emergencies for the existing facilities as far as repairs and things like this. Category 4 might be, these are states that have more than currently have more than 2 nursing homes for veterans. And so they use all this category to put us on a list, national funding list. Then once we get on that list, then we can make reasonable projections on how long it might take us to move up the list to get the official funding.
Will this be for just veterans or their dependents, or?
At the moment, it is a 90-bed facility. Now this will be for veterans. I think as the laws change and qualifications might change, it may get to the point for spouses, and they'll be working on that. Each facility has its own established criteria. For example, it might be more for personal care or intermediate care, and then you have skilled care. So it depends on the prerogative of, if you ask for 90 beds, then the federal government might have an overall plan. They might say, well, we need 30 of those beds to be skilled care. So the Commissioner of Veteran Affairs in the state, when they design a particular facility, then they'll put maybe a couple of wings that might go just for skilled care.
Okay.
And then the personal care may eventually go to intermediate, and then they might end up in skill.
Okay.
So it's the overall plan, and that's their prerogative at that time. We want the 90-bed facility, and ever how they want to give us the facilities for allocation of beds, and fine. Once we get on the national funding list, then we'll have a little more leverage to come back and say, the Chamber of Commerce, they'll be buying up in the transport, we'll be expanding maybe on out Louisville Road. So maybe we can look for maybe 30 acres. You can have a 90-bed facility here on this 20, but we could have the greatest 90-bed facility in the United States if we had 30 acres and, get it away from the industrial. But you have to bring something to the table. You got to make sure that you're at a certain leverage area, and that would be the next flight. But I would say we get approval of funding from the federal government would probably be maybe 3 to 4 years. But that's just a guess. We've had too much fake news coming out about people guessing that's associated with this. Anybody wants to know, it's either Senator Wilson, Representative Meredith, or myself. We stay on top of this every day, but we can't just guess. But once we get on the national funding list, and possibly you can say, well, how can you go from maybe 60th to the top category? Well, you can still maybe get in the top 20, and maybe they'll select funding for the top 20. So,
when do you think the first veteran will be in the nursing home? When do you see that taking place?
Here in Bowling Green?
Yes, sir.
I'd say probably maybe 4 years.
Okay.
4 to 6 years. Now, I'm having more positive regard for the system. Normally it would take a considerable amount of time, but it's like having short-term and long-term goals. Once we get on the national funding list and we see where we're positioned, then the president may come up and say, well, and this would be based on, you can't move our legislators, Senator McConnell, et cetera, can't move us up the list. But what they can do is talk to the president and say, well, you promised to serve the veterans and help the veterans. Now you've got to, can we at least go ahead and, allocate funding for a certain percentage, so they can get him to make the policy to say, yes, let's go ahead and take care of those that's already approved of. That may speed things up. I think you have to look at it that way. You can't be lulled in a false sense of security. You've got to constantly focus on discontent to say, okay, we're here now, but in the meantime, once we get on the national funding list, then the Commissioner of Veteran Affairs has to develop construction specs for how to construct the facility. They have to match them up with a local building site. And we based ours originally on the one that's going in at Fort Knox. Now, Fort Knox should be taking patients within the next month. But it's cost more than they anticipated. So once the Fort Knox facility gets up and running, then we might have to, that's up to the Commissioner of Veteran Affairs. They'll just come up with additional construction specs that will keep us within the $30 million budget.
Okay.
So I think we've done everything like we're supposed to do, and everybody's done their job. We haven't been bogged down by politics or anything else. I think that was just a dry run that we did in January, and it was not a setback. We never quit or back off. We just changed direction. It's very easy to do. And we stayed focused, and everybody did their job at the different levels, and the Brad office helped us with a tremendous amount of demographic information and data to back this up, and we're really excited about it. I think that's one way to serve the veterans, and we have approximately, as I said, 40,000 veterans, but the population in Kentucky of veterans is decreasing. You would expect it to increase. But the population, our World War II veterans are passing on. Vietnam veterans is getting a little shaky now.
The Korea era on there.
Yes, if you make those projections, you have to realistically justify what you're doing. And so we might be the last nursing home that they'll build in Kentucky for a long, long time. That's why I had to you have to get in there and fight for it, because otherwise it would probably go to northern Kentucky. And you have to, it's more planning and short-term goals and problem solving than it is just politics. but it's identifying your need and justifying it and working with all the components to make sure that everybody does their job. And I think that's where we are now.
I appreciate this interview, and I'm really excited about the way you've helped with the two passions of your life so far. I can see is the military and the medical field, and I feel like that's your this veterans nursing home is both things. It's medical and it's military. That's your passions,
and it should bring a tremendous economic impact on South Central Kentucky.
Yes.
So that's their reasons for providing the website. It's investment, and but we have to go from step to step. And I suppose when I say 4 years, the state legislature approves a budget every 2 years. Okay. Then the committees that you have to go through, the Appropriations Committee and the Veterans Affairs Committee, they only meet sometime once a year. So all of a sudden you're hurried up, and then you got to wait.
Yeah.
So it's not that we've been working on it for 4 years. We've done our part, and then we waited.
Yeah, waiting.
Yeah. I think that's the key thing.
Yeah.
Is waiting. We've been waiting, and but we've been doing it in an honest way, commitment, and had the support that we really. So if you've got a good product and you put it together correctly, then you've got to be able to sell it so people will believe in it and see the ultimate results. And we think we've done that.
Yeah, it sounds like you have.
But we've got to work twice as hard to keep it. No amount of success can lull us into a false sense of security, because we've got to work hard next to make sure that we get the construction specs, that there's correlation between the building site, and we have a kind of a committee to kind of oversee this to make sure that it doesn't get out of hand.
Okay.
So there's still a lot of work down the road, but the one step is to get on the national funding list, and then you never know. Congress could come up and say, okay, we'll approve all of those from the top 50. We could be in the top 50, so it makes a big difference.
It does.
And with all the categories, they'll take care of all those first. See, one of the arguments was that you're just getting a new facility in Radcliffe, so why in the world you want another one down in Bowling Green? It don't make any sense. And we don't even have patients in this. It's a 120-bed facility at Fort Knox. Well, the argument is we still have 40,000 veterans representing 24 counties in South Central Kentucky that are underserved. Statistically, we don't exist when it comes to Fort Knox. Fort Knox is a retirement medical community. They already have about 200 applicants waiting. Plus, they serve metropolitan Louisville. Statistically, we don't exist down here. People, we still have an underserved area. We had to keep pounding that. One thing is, just like the federal government, you take Spicer, for example, in the presidential briefing, they'll ask him 20 questions. He's got 5 answers he's going to keep giving them. As I said earlier, and he keeps coming back to it. And I kept saying, we still have this need. It makes no difference. I really don't care what's going on in Hazard, Lexington, Fort Knox, or over in Madisonville. We still have the need here. It doesn't make any difference. And, if you're a veteran, you're in Alberton, you'll probably die at home before you would go to Hazard to a nursing home or go to Madisonville.
Yeah, you don't want to go all the way.
No, you'll die at home.
Yeah.
Now, let's just make it comfortable, and have a facility here. It narrows down to the fact sometimes you have to really pound it into people's brains to say, this is what it is. And we've had people in Eastern Kentucky recently forced the commissioner into doing another feasibility study. We did the greatest feasibility study here. We could back up our problem. We didn't care what happened down the road. But the Commissioner of Veteran Affairs does their own feasibility study to make sure that we're not, out of order, that we have that the need is there. People in Eastern Kentucky were looking at it economically by saying, we need a facility in this rural area. Well, they're already in the Hazard area, the group that was from McGoffin County that wanted this. They protested with the state legislature, caused a lot of grief. So the Commissioner of Veteran Affairs hired an outside agency to do a feasibility study, determine the need. Well, we ranked #1 in the state right here, as we do. We
Yeah.
did. Our opponents ranked #8 in the state. Plus, they are already within the travel distance. You have to be 90 miles away from another facility. They were only 70 miles away from the hazard facility. So all they did was just throw up the smoke screen and do something. They thought it was like Eastern versus Western
Yeah,
Kentucky.
it seems like the
And-
people in this part of the state were kind of forgotten. Is that what you're saying?
No, I'd say that people in Eastern Kentucky wanted a facility for the reason that they say, well, let's build a facility, then they will come. You don't do that. You have to have patients, or you have to have the demographic information to say, yeah, we've got this many veterans. We've got 40,000 to pick from. So we know we're good. Up there they didn't. Plus they didn't qualify all along, but they created enough disturbance in the legislature to force the commissioner to do a feasibility study. Once he did that, outside independent agency, we ranked first in the state and they ranked 8th, which meant they'll probably never ever get anything done.
Yeah.
So, but we justified ours as we went along. We knew what we were doing, and that's where we are today. But in other words, we had all the answers, and we did a good job going through the process. And we did face some obstacles there through the Democratic leadership in the House last year, and because at that time Stumbo was versus Bevan, they were fighting back and forth, and all the stuff was in the news there. That was very distracting. They were trying to keep the governor from even coming up with a budget, so his priorities were different. We met with him throughout the year, and he was committed all along to go with the project. He got a bad rap, but he didn't deserve it, because I know I've been with the project from the beginning to the end, and I know who did and who didn't.
Governor Bevan's is a veteran also, correct?
Yes,
Army
he is.
veteran.
So is Janine Hampton.
Yeah, I've interviewed her about a month ago, so she's
Janine and I are in the Military Officers Association together.
Yeah,
And
she's a captain too, also.
yes, I think she was, at least a captain.
Yeah, in the Air Force.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So the lieutenant governor and governor has been, supportive of this, but however, they're even the Commissioner of Veteran Affairs can't go over and lobby for us, because the commissioner works for the governor, and there's all kinds of little
Yeah.
segments. So we have to do something thorough, so that whenever we send a representative or senator to the state to lobby for us, they got everything to back it up. As simple as it makes it easy for them. It's just right across the board. And it gives the governor something to say, hey, I'm making a decision, but I'm making a confident decision. I know what I want. This, they backed this up, and they've commissioner done this. He's done everything. Every question that every obstacle you could think about, we've solved it. Once you identify your obstacles, you know what the solution is going to be. It's a simple problem solving. And we took care of all that as we went along, and very proud of where we are. But again, you've got to work twice as hard to stay there and make sure that nothing interferes with the process. You got to embrace it and protect it and fight for it. And fighting is true. You have to really do that in the legislature, or we've had to do that. And I think our representatives have done quite well to help us out.
Yes, sir. Well, I appreciate this, your time, and I especially appreciate your service and the way you help your community. I really appreciate this.
It's an honor.
All right, thank you.